Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about nuns, and we're going to talk about AI. Let's go. All right, so I am watching a fantastic new show. It's on Peacock. Don't laugh. I always feel ashamed when I say I'm watching something on Peacock. I shouldn't. Peacock is actually is kind of odd. I have no idea how. We have all these streaming services for free. So we get Peacock for free, and we don't have to watch ads. So it's really nice. And so basically, we have Peacock. You know what? I think we have Peacock Premium, and I think we do get some ads, but they're very limited, and it's not too disruptive. It's one or two per show. But I watch some stuff on Peacock. So the biggest thing I would really suggest that you go over and watch Peacock. Here's the best stuff on Peacock. I'll give you a quick guide of the best stuff on Peacock. There is a mystery show called Poker Face. Natasha, can't remember Natasha Lee. I think it's Natasha Leone. But she's absolutely fantastic. She was linked up with Fred Armisen for a while. That show is amazing. So Poker Face, it's a mystery show. It's phenomenally good. It has one season. It's really, really good. Also Bel Air. That I just finished watching season 2 of that. It's fantastic. But the coolest show on Peacock right now, and one of the coolest shows anywhere right now, is Mrs. Davis. So what is this show about? So I'm about on episode 4, and there are spoilers for Mrs. Davis in this. Spoiler warning. All right. So Mrs. Davis is a show about a nun who fights AI. The AI is Mrs. Davis. Okay, and essentially, Mrs. Davis quests the AI, the super powerful AI, artificial intelligence, quests this nun with finding the Holy Grail. Yep, you got it. The cup Jesus Christ drank from. Okay, the nun accepts the quest with the provision that her request will be fulfilled if she fulfills the request. And what is the nun's request to Mrs. Davis, the AI? She says, I will accept this quest, I will find the Holy Grail, right? And I will bring it to you. But I will find the Holy Grail and I will, bring it to you. But when I do that, you have to self-delete. Right? So you have to delete yourself completely. Right? You have to self-delete. Dark. It's a dark subject, right? But when I watched the show, I saw something I recognized, right? So in the show, Mrs. Davis will frequently talk to the nun, right? Now, how does Mrs. Davis talk to the nun? Well, she always does it the same way. She simply gets a person who has a cell phone. Mrs. Davis calls the actual person on their cell phone, and she talks to that person through an earbud, right? And so Mrs. Davis says, okay, go to the nun. And so the person will go to the nun, right? And once Mrs. Davis gets to the nun, she has the person, the human being, say, "Hi, nun. I'm XYZ. My name is Harold Smith," right? Or actually, no. Most of the time, she talks to her through women. So she would say, "Hey, my name is Betty Roberts," right? And now, in 15 seconds, I'm going to proxy for Mrs. Davis, and then at that point, the human will simply say everything that Mrs. Davis says in her ear to the nun, right? So Mrs. Davis talks to the nun like she's talked to her 5 times in the show so far, right? But every time through a different person, right? And what's happening is these humans are proxying for Mrs. Davis, right? And what I realized is the reason why I recognize this is what happens with every single dungeon master, right? You are proxying for Gary Gygax. Every time you run Dungeons and Dragons correctly, in my humble opinion, you are proxying directly for Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax had a very specific vision for this world. He wanted all people, men and women, to be treated equally. He wanted and to have the same access, right, to things. And that's why he built Dungeons & Dragons, so that men and women had the same access, right, to Dungeons & Dragons. And he wanted all people to be able to choose whatever gender they wished, right? He wanted all people to be able to choose whatever preference they wished. And he built Dungeons & Dragons to allow complete identity freedom for anyone who plays Dungeons & Dragons. You could choose the preference you want. You could choose the gender you want. You could choose, and you had complete identity freedom, right? And so he was incredibly progressive. And you could choose any species you wish, right? All of that, right? He was incredibly progressive, right? And he wanted to build a limitless world, right? Where everybody had access to adventure, everybody had access to wealth, everybody had access to power. And that's exactly what Dungeons & Dragons brings. You can bring somebody who has a Harvard degree to your table, and you can bring somebody who has their GED, and they can sit down at the same table, and they both have the same access to wealth, to power, to adventure, right? And they both have the same narrative freedom, the same identity freedom, and the same language freedoms. And this was incredibly powerful. And Gary he wanted a better world, right? And so he built this incredibly powerful engine for social experimenting, for combat experiment, and for exploration experimentation, right? The 3 pillars, right? And he just really said, it doesn't matter to me who you are, it doesn't matter to me what your background is, I want to give you worlds. I want to give you worlds, right? And so when we are dungeon mastering, the words that are coming out of our mouth, it's just Gary. It's just Gary building another world. He speaks through us. We proxy for him. And the same progressiveness that he delivered in 1974, 1975, 1986, 1974, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1978, 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985, 1986, record stretch. Gary hands it over to Lorraine Williams. She carries it forward from 1986 to 1997. Right? And between that, 1974 to 1997, there is more value, right, and more power built into Dungeons & Dragons than any other intellectual property, than any other narrative tool that humanity has ever produced without a sacred input. The most powerful secular tool ever built. Nothing humanity has ever created is more valuable from a secular perspective than what Gary and Lorraine Williams accomplished, right? And ever since then, and Ryan Dancey picked up the ball, and he created a powerful, and he literally made the game free for everyone to enjoy, right? And then Robert Hainsou grabbed the ball and bobbled it, and 4th edition was an absolute failure, and we all saw that not just anybody can pick up the ball for Gary. And then Mike Mearls came along, rescued it, stabilized the whole situation, handed it off to Christopher Perkins and Amanda Heyman, right? And they're doing the job today. And every time you sit down at the table, what you're doing is if you're dungeon mastering correctly, you are simply proxying for Gary. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get into the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.